The 41st floor pitch room at Meridian and Vale had one of those long glass walls that turned the whole city into a backdrop, and I'd stood in front of it for the better part of a decade, closing rooms that other people said couldn't be closed. That morning I wasn't presenting. I was watching Dario Halloran tell 40 of my colleagues that the work I'd built was a commodity. "Creatives are interchangeable," he said, pacing like he'd invented the idea. "Talent is a line item. We'll survive one designer walking out." He was looking right at me when he said it. He wanted me to flinch. I didn't. I capped my pen, slid my notebook off the table, and thought about the 4 names in my phone that he'd never once asked about. He had no idea what he'd just started. The badge reader outside my office chirped green the way it had every morning for 9 years, and I remember thinking that was the last ordinary sound of my career at Meridian and Vale. I was Ren Castellani, Executive Creative Director, and I had spent 9 years turning that agency from a competent mid-market shop into a name that Fortune 100 marketing chiefs actually took meetings for. My office was on the 41st floor, glass on 2 sides, a view of the harbor that I'd earned by outlasting 3 CEOs and 1 recession. I didn't decorate it much. A single shelf of awards I never looked at, a wall of framed campaign boards I looked at every day. Meridian and Vale had been founded 31 years earlier by Emmett Halloran, a man who understood one thing better than anyone I ever met: that clients don't buy agencies, they buy people. He said it to me my first week, in the elevator, unprompted, like he was handing me a key. "The logo on the door is mine," he told me, "but the reason anyone stays is whoever picks up the phone at 11 at night when their launch is on fire. Be that person, Ren, and you'll never be replaceable." I was that person. For 9 years I was that person. I ran the 4 accounts that kept the lights on. Sabre Athletic, a sportswear giant that had come to us as a regional afterthought and left every quarter as a national headline. Lumia Beauty, whose founder called me directly, never the account team. Orsted Financial, buttoned down, allergic to risk, who trusted me specifically because I never let the creative outrun their compliance department. And Kestrel Motors, the electric vehicle upstart whose CMO had followed me from her last company because, in her words, I was the only person in advertising who never lied to her. Together, those 4 accounts represented $43.6 million in annual billings, more than half the agency's revenue. I didn't advertise that number, I just protected it. What almost nobody knew, because I never made it a talking point, was how those relationships were actually structured. When I brought each of those clients in, I hadn't just won the pitch. I'd written the engagement. Every master service agreement named me, personally, as the lead of record. 2 of them, Lumia and Kestrel, contained a clause I'd negotiated quietly, years apart, with 2 different general counsels who understood exactly what they were buying. A key person clause. If the named engagement lead left the agency, the client had a 30-day window to terminate without penalty and take their business wherever that person went. I hadn't inserted those clauses out of vanity. I'd done it because Emmett Halloran taught me that in this business, your name is the only asset nobody can vote you out of. Then Emmett got sick, and his son came home. Dario Halloran had spent the previous 6 years accumulating credentials the way some people accumulate frequent flyer miles. An MBA from a school that put its logo on everything, 2 years at a consulting firm that had never made a single advertisement, a brief and loudly announced stint at a growth studio that folded quietly the month he left. He arrived at Meridian and Vale with a title nobody had held before, Head of Transformation, and a slide deck about operational efficiency in creative services that used the word synergy without irony. The first time we met properly was in the 39th floor conference room, the ugly one without the view, which I later understood was not an accident. He'd scheduled a capabilities alignment session with the senior creative leads, and he ran it like a man auditing a warehouse. "Ren," he said, reading my name off a printout as if we hadn't already been introduced twice. "You're carrying a lot of headcount for 4 accounts. Talk me through the ROI." "The ROI," I said, "is that those 4 accounts are 53% of the agency's revenue and 100% of its industry reputation." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. "Sure, but that's fragile, isn't it? Everything running through one person. That's not a business, that's a bottleneck." He said it lightly, almost warmly, and a couple of the junior directors down the table gave the small nervous laugh that people give when they're not sure whose side is winning. I'd sat through enough of these to know what was happening. Dario didn't want to understand the accounts. He wanted to prove they didn't need me. His father had built a company on the principle that people were the product. Dario had come home to disprove his father, and I was the most expensive thing standing in the way of the story he wanted to tell the board. "Relationships aren't a bottleneck," I said. "They're the whole product. Sabre didn't sign with an agency. They signed with the team that answers at midnight. So did the other 3. "That's a very romantic way to describe a vendor contract," he said, and this time the laugh was a little louder. I let it go. I'd learned a long time ago that you don't win these rooms by matching the volume. You win them later, quietly, when the noise has moved on. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled up the 4 master service agreements on my own machine. I'd kept clean personal copies, a habit from a paranoid mentor 2 jobs ago, and I read them again, slowly, the way you check a parachute you're fairly sure you'll never need. Sabre. Named lead of record. Orsted. Named lead of record, with a client consent requirement for any change of engagement leadership. Lumia. Named lead plus the key person termination clause. Kestrel. Named lead, key person clause, and a 30-day walkaway window that had been the CMO's own idea. I closed the laptop and looked out at the harbor going gold in the late light, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not fear. Not even anger, really. Just a very cold, very steady clarity, because I understood sitting there exactly what Dario Halloran was preparing to do, and exactly what he didn't know. He thought he was about to trim a line item. He had no idea he was about to hand 4 of the biggest brands in the country a legal reason to walk out the door behind me. 2 days later, my calendar showed a new meeting I hadn't accepted. 30 minutes. 9th floor HR suite, the one with no windows. The organizer was Dario Halloran. The subject line just said sink. I already knew it wasn't a sink. The 9th floor HR suite smelled like carpet cleaner and cheap coffee, and Dario had chosen the seat facing the door so I'd have to walk toward him. There was an HR business partner named Camille already seated, a woman I'd met exactly once, with a folder squared perfectly in front of her and the specific stillness of someone who'd been briefed on how this would go. Dario didn't stand when I came in. He gestured at the chair across from him like he was doing me a favor. "Ren, thanks for making time." As if I'd had a choice. I sat. I set my hands on the table loose and waited. I'd learned that silence makes people like Dario nervous, and nervous people over-explain. He didn't disappoint. "So look, this isn't easy, and I want to be respectful of your tenure here." Tenure. 9 years, reduced to a word people use for things they're about to end. But as part of the transformation initiative, we're restructuring the client leadership model, moving away from the single-owner approach. It's a governance issue, honestly. Too much concentration risk in one seat. "My seat," I said. "The role," he corrected smoothly. "We're transitioning to a pod structure. Distributed ownership. It's more scalable, more resilient. He'd clearly rehearsed the word resilient. And unfortunately, that means the executive creative director position as it currently exists is being eliminated. There it was. Not a demotion, not a lateral, elimination. The tidy corporate word for a wound. Camille slid the folder across the table with 2 fingers. "We've prepared a separation package that reflects your years of service," she said, in the gentle voice HR reserves for the moment right after the knife goes in. "It's generous. There's a non-disparagement provision, standard, and we'd ask you to transition your accounts over the next 2 weeks before your access is deactivated." I didn't open the folder. I looked at Dario. "You want me to spend 2 weeks handing my clients to the pods?" "That's the professional thing," he said, and I watched him relax slightly, because he thought professional was a lever he could pull on me. These relationships belong to the agency, Ren, not to any one person. That's kind of the whole point of what we're fixing. He leaned back. "I know it feels personal. It isn't. It's just math. You're one line in a very large spreadsheet. I've been humiliated before. Everyone in this business has. But there's a particular kind of insult in being told that the thing you built with your own name, the midnight calls, the saved launches, the CMO who followed you across an entire industry because you never lied to her, is a rounding error. He wasn't just firing me. He was telling me it had never meant anything." Behind me, the door had opened at some point. A few people from the creative floor had drifted into the open HR bay outside the glass, pretending to get coffee, watching. Dario noticed them and, incredibly, seemed to like the audience. He raised his voice half a notch. "I'll be honest with the room, because I think it's a healthy lesson," he said. "This is exactly the fragility I've been talking about. One person convinces herself she is the business. She isn't. Nobody is. We'll survive one creative walking out the door, and frankly, we'll be stronger for it. That's not a threat. That's just how real companies work." Somebody outside the glass laughed. A short, uncertain sound. One of the junior art directors I'd personally hired, mentored, promoted. He caught my eye through the glass and looked away fast, down at his shoes, and I understood him completely and forgave him instantly. Staying quiet when a loud man holds your paycheck isn't betrayal. It's survival. I'd been that person once, at a different agency, watching a different woman get walked out. I knew the shape of that silence from the inside. What Dario read as defeat on my face was something else entirely. I was doing arithmetic, because he'd just said the one thing that mattered, out loud, in front of witnesses. These relationships belong to the agency, not to any one person. He believed that. He'd built his entire restructuring on that belief, and it was, on 4 specific contracts, legally and provably false. "Do you have any questions?" Camille asked softly. "Just one," I said. I kept my voice even, almost pleasant. "When you say my access is deactivated in 2 weeks, does that include my email, or is there a transition window on that?" Camille glanced at Dario. "We'd deactivate everything on your last day," she said. "For security." "Of course," I said. "That's clean. I appreciate that." And I did. I wanted it clean. I wanted a bright, unambiguous line between the day I was an employee of Meridian and Vale and the day I wasn't, because everything I was about to do depended on which side of that line I stood. I signed nothing. I told them I'd review the package with counsel, which was my right, and Camille's face did a small thing that told me they'd hoped I wouldn't. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and picked up the folder I hadn't opened. At the door I paused, and I looked back at Dario, and for 1 second I let him have the moment he wanted so badly. "You're probably right," I said. "Nobody's irreplaceable." He smiled, satisfied, a man who'd just won an argument he didn't understand. I walked out through the bay, past the junior art director who couldn't look at me, past the coffee machine and the pretend busy faces, and I didn't hurry and I didn't slow down. In the elevator, alone, I took out my phone. Not to call anyone. Not yet. I just opened my contacts and looked at 4 names. The CMO of Sabre, the founder of Lumia, the general counsel of Ørsted, the woman at Kestrel who'd followed me across an industry. 4 people who, in about 72 hours, were each going to receive a very short, very calm message from me. But first I had a call to make to a lawyer. Let me pause here for a second, because I want to ask you something before this turns into what it turned into. When Dario stood in that HR bay and told a room full of my own people that I'd only convinced myself I mattered, would you have signed the folder and quietly transitioned your accounts like a professional? Or would you have done what I did next? I'm honestly curious where you land, because I've heard strong arguments both ways. Tell me in the comments, sign it or burn it down, and tell me why. And if you've ever been the most valuable person in a room and treated like the least, subscribe and stay with me, because what those 4 phone calls set in motion is the part I still can't quite believe myself. I never thought a lawyer's office could feel like the calmest place I'd been in years, but that's exactly what it was. Her name was Ingrid Solberg, and she'd spent 20 years doing nothing but agency and talent contracts before she went independent, which meant she read a master service agreement the way a surgeon reads a chart, fast, unsentimental, already 3 moves ahead. I'd sent her the 4 MSAs the night before. When I walked in, she had them printed, tabbed with colored flags, and she was smiling the particular smile of a professional who has just been handed a very good hand of cards. "Sit down," she said. "Do you understand what you have here?" "I think so," I said. "I want you to tell me I'm not wrong." She spread the 4 contracts across her desk like a dealer. "You're not wrong. You're the opposite of wrong." She tapped the first one. "Sabre. You're named lead of record. Not the agency. You, by name. That alone doesn't let them walk, but it means every deliverable, every scope, every renewal is legally tied to your involvement. The moment you're gone, they have grounds to claim the engagement materially changed." She tapped the second. "Ørsted. Same named lead structure, but with a client consent clause. The agency can't change engagement leadership without Ørsted's written approval, which means the second Meridian tries to reassign your accounts to their little pods, they're in breach unless Ørsted signs off. And Ørsted won't, because Ørsted is Ørsted and they trust exactly one person there. You." I nodded. I knew all of this. But hearing it in her flat, certain voice made it real in a way it hadn't been when it was just clauses in my own head at 2 a.m. "Now these 2, Ingrid said, and her smile widened. She laid Lumia and Kestrel side by side. "These are the ones that end it. Key person clauses. Both of them say the same thing in slightly different language. If the named engagement lead, UE, leaves the agency, the client has a 30-day window to terminate the entire agreement without penalty and without cause. No exit fee, no transition obligation, nothing. They can walk clean and take their business anywhere. Including," she said, "wherever you happen to land next." "I know," I said quietly. "I wrote them." She looked up at me over her glasses. "Why?" I thought about Emmett Halloran in that elevator my first week. Your name is the only asset nobody can vote you out of. Because a mentor once told me that in advertising, the agency owns the door but not the reason anyone walks through it. I didn't put those clauses in to threaten anyone. I put them in so that if the day ever came when someone decided I was a line item, the clients would get to decide whether they agreed. "Well," Ingrid said, "that day came." She squared the papers. "Here's what you need to understand, because it matters legally. You cannot solicit these clients while you're still employed. That's the non-compete argument they'll reach for, and it's the only thing that could turn this from your victory into their lawsuit. So we do this the right way. You don't call anyone until your last day is over and your access is off. And even then, you don't pitch them. You don't poach them. You simply inform them, factually, of a change in circumstances that the contract entitles them to know about. What they do with that information is entirely their decision. And if they ask me where I'm going, then you can tell them, she said, because by then you'll have somewhere to go. That was the piece I hadn't fully built yet, and Ingrid knew it. So over the next 4 days, the 4 days before my official last day at Meridian and Vale, I did the quietest, most careful work of my career. I didn't touch a single client. I didn't send a single message. Instead, I incorporated a company. A small one, just a name and an EIN and a bank account, and a lease on a modest floor 11 blocks from the harbor. Castellani Creative. I hired no one. I announced nothing. It existed only on paper, a lifeboat tied off and waiting in the dark. And then I waited for my last day, which arrived on a Wednesday, gray and unremarkable. At 8:19 that morning, my badge chirped red at the 41st floor door, and a security guard I'd known for 6 years walked me to my office with an apology in his eyes and stood there while I put 9 years into a single box. One shelf of awards I never looked at. A framed photo. My good pens. I left the campaign boards on the wall because they belonged to the work, and the work would outlive whatever Dario turned this place into. At 8:47, I handed over my laptop and my badge to Camille in the lobby, signed the equipment return form, the only thing I signed, and walked out onto the street a private citizen for the first time in 9 years. I got in my car. I did not drive away. I sat in the parking structure and I waited until my phone lost its connection to the Meridian network, and then I watched the little icon confirm it. My corporate email, deactivated. My access, off. The bright, clean line I'd asked Camille for. I was on the other side of it now. I opened a new message. I drafted it a dozen times in my head, and it had gotten shorter every time because Ingrid was right. This wasn't a pitch. It was a notice. 4 recipients, sent individually, no group thread, each one personal. As of this morning, I've concluded my time at Meridian and Vale. I'm reaching out directly because our agreement names me as your engagement lead, and I believe you should hear about this change from me rather than from a transition email. I've started my own studio, Castellani Creative. Whatever you choose to do next, I'm grateful for the work we've done together, and I'm here if you want to talk. I read it 4 times. Then I sent it, one recipient at a time, and I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and made myself breathe. The first reply came in 11 minutes. It was from the general counsel at Ørsted, the button-down, risk-allergic financial client, the one who never moved fast on anything. 2 lines. Ren, we were not informed of any change in engagement leadership, which our agreement requires. Please have your counsel call ours today. We'd like to understand our options. Their agreement required client consent to change my seat. Meridian had eliminated my seat without ever asking. Ørsted's lawyers had noticed before I'd even finished my coffee. The phone buzzed again. Lumia's founder. Then again, Kestrel. I hadn't even opened them yet. Somewhere on the 41st floor, Dario Halloran was about to start a Wednesday he thought would be quiet. He'd eliminated the bottleneck. He'd trimmed the line item. He was, at that very moment, probably telling someone how well the transition was going. He had no idea that 30 floors up and 11 blocks away, the door had already started to close behind me, and that 4 of the biggest brands in the country were reading, at that exact moment, the legal reason they were allowed to walk through it with me. The call from Meridian and Vale came on Friday at 3:14 in the afternoon, and by then the fourth account had already made up its mind. Let me walk you through the 2 days in between, because that's where it actually happened. Not in a boardroom confrontation, but in a series of quiet, devastating phone calls that Dario Halloran didn't hear until it was far too late to stop them. Ørsted moved first, exactly as their contract demanded. Ingrid spoke to their general counsel Wednesday afternoon, and the conversation was brief and clinical. Meridian had changed the engagement leadership without the written client consent the agreement required. That was a breach. Ørsted's counsel, being Ørsted's counsel, didn't threaten and didn't posture. He simply issued a formal notice of breach and gave Meridian 5 business days to cure it, knowing full well the only cure was to reinstate me, which they couldn't do because they'd eliminated the role in front of 40 witnesses. Lumia didn't bother with lawyers first. The founder called me herself Wednesday night. I recognized the number and let it ring twice before I answered, the way you do when you already know the call is going to change something. Ren. Her voice was warm and furious at the same time. I got your message. Tell me they didn't actually let you go. They eliminated the role, I said. It's cleaner than firing. Same result. A long breath on the line. I have called that agency for 6 years and asked for exactly one person. You. Do you know what my board would say if I told them Lumia's creative is now being handled by what did the email call it? A pod. She said the word like it tasted bad. There's a clause in our contract. My general counsel flagged it years ago and said it was unusually favorable to us. 30 days, clean exit, no penalty if the named lead leaves. That's you, isn't it? That's me, I said. Then consider this our 30-day notice. And Ren, send me whatever I need to sign to move to Castellani Creative. I'm not going to pretend to shop this. Kestrel was the one I wasn't sure about, and Kestrel was the one that broke my composure. The CMO, the woman who had followed me across an entire industry, who'd once told me I was the only person in advertising who never lied to her, called Thursday morning. She didn't say hello. They told me you transitioned out to pursue other opportunities, she said. I want to hear you say it in your own words. I got walked out with a security guard on Wednesday, I said. The founder's son decided I was a bottleneck. The line went very quiet. Then, I put that key person clause in myself. Do you remember? You didn't ask for it. I insisted, because I told you I was signing with you, not with a building. Her voice tightened. I meant it. We're invoking it. Kestrel goes where you go, and I'll tell the whole industry why if anyone asks. That was 3 of 4 by Thursday afternoon. Sabre, the biggest of them all, 19 million in billings on its own, was the holdout. No key person clause on Sabre, just the named lead structure, which gave them grounds to renegotiate, but not to walk clean. Their CMO was a careful man, and he didn't call. He waited. I understood. Sabre had the most to lose and the least contractual cover, and he wasn't going to torch a 31-year relationship on principle alone. So I didn't push. Ingrid had been clear. Inform, don't solicit. I'd informed. The rest wasn't mine to force. Then Friday, 3:14 p.m., my phone lit up with a number I knew by heart. Meridian and Vale, main line. I let it ring twice. It was Dario. No hello, no pretense of warmth, and underneath the control in his voice I could hear something I'd never heard from him before. Fear. Ren, we need to talk. There seems to be some confusion with a couple of the accounts, and I think you may have said some things to clients that weren't appropriate given your separation terms. I haven't signed my separation terms, I said, and I didn't solicit anyone. I informed 4 clients of a change their contracts entitled them to know about. My counsel can walk yours through the distinction. A pause. I could hear other people in the room with him. Muffled voices. Someone saying a number. Orsted's lawyers sent us a breach notice, he said, and the smoothness was gone now. Lumia gave notice this morning. Kestrel's counsel called an hour ago. That's $30 million in billings threatening to walk out the door in a single week. His voice cracked up half an octave. You have to understand how this looks to the board. My father built this place. You can't take half the company with you. And there it was, the panic monologue. I'd watched him deliver the confident version of this exact speech in the HR bay 4 days earlier. Nobody's irreplaceable, it's just math. One line in a very large spreadsheet. Now he was living inside the math, and it was eating him alive. I'm not taking anything, Dario, I said, and I kept my voice as level as his had been when he'd performed my elimination for an audience. That's the part you never understood. I can't take clients. Clients aren't property, they're people, and people go where they're respected. You stood in a room full of my colleagues and told them relationships belong to the agency, not to any one person. I let that sit for a second. You were so sure. You built your whole restructuring on it, but you never read the contracts. Your father would have read the contracts. The mention of Emmett landed like I knew it would. Silence. Come back, he said finally, and the word cost him something. Whatever the package was, double it, triple it. We'll reinstate the role, we'll call it whatever you want. Just help me hold the accounts. If Sabre goes too, the agency doesn't make its numbers this quarter. It doesn't recover from that. $43.6 million. That was the number he was really saying. That was what my seat had been worth all along. The seat he'd eliminated to prove it was worth nothing. I looked out the window of the small floor 11 blocks away that already had my name on the lease. Lumia signed. Kestrel signed. Orsted's counsel drafting the paperwork. 3 of 4, and the 4th still deciding. No, I said. I don't think I will. Sabre called on Monday. Not Dario, the client. Their careful, patient CMO, the one who'd waited all week while the other 3 walked, because he had the most to lose and the least contractual cover. He didn't invoke a clause, because he didn't have one. He just asked me to lunch. I've been doing this 30 years, he said, stirring coffee he didn't drink. I've watched a lot of agencies tell me their people don't matter, and then watched them lose the people who did. Meridian just did the loudest version of that I've ever seen. He set the spoon down. I don't have a key person clause, Ren. I have something better. I have a choice. And I'd rather spend $19 million a year with someone who picks up the phone at midnight than save myself a renegotiation. He extended his hand across the table. Send me the Castellani creative paperwork. All 4 of us in one room again. That's the agency I signed with. The building was always incidental. 4 of 4. I didn't gloat. There was nobody to gloat to, and anyway, gloating was never the point. I sat in that restaurant and felt the 9 years settle into place behind me, not as a loss, but as a foundation. Meridian, and Vail did not make its numbers that quarter. $43.6 million in billings left the building over 11 days, and there is no restructuring deck in the world that survives losing 53% of your revenue in a single pay period. The board, the real board, the one Emmett had assembled decades earlier, convened an emergency session. I heard about it secondhand, the way you hear about weather in a country you've left. They asked Dario one question that mattered. How did we lose 4 anchor clients in a week? And his answer? That it was contractual, that it was clauses nobody could have known about, did not survive contact with the fact that his father's own general counsel had known, had approved every one of those clauses years ago and had assumed anyone running transformation would read the agreements before eliminating the person named in them. Dario, quote, S title lasted 6 more weeks. Head of transformation. They didn't fire him. You don't fire the founder's son in front of the industry, but they created a new role above him, brought in a veteran agency operator from outside, and quietly moved Dario to something with the word strategy in it and no clients attached. A line item, you might say. One name in a very large spreadsheet. I saw him once after that, months later, at an industry dinner neither of us could avoid. He was standing near the bar, a little apart from a group that wasn't quite including him, and when he noticed me across the room, he didn't look away. He gave me a small nod. Not friendly, not hostile, just the nod of a man who had finally done the arithmetic. I nodded back, and that was all. I didn't need anything from him. You only stay angry at people who took something from you, and Dario, in the end, had given me everything. He'd handed me the reason to leave, and the 4 clients to leave with Castellani Creative is 2 years old now. We're 11 people on that modest floor near the harbor, and I've turned down more work than I've taken because I promised myself I'd never again build something so big that a stranger with a slide deck could decide it was a bottleneck. 3 of the junior creatives who couldn't look at me through the glass that day work for me now. I never made them apologize. Silence in a room where a loud man holds your paycheck was never the thing I held against anyone. I'd stood in that same silence once, at a different agency, watching a different woman get walked out, and I'd learned the whole lesson from her without her ever knowing she taught it. On my first day in the new office, I hung exactly one thing on the wall, not an award. A note Emmett Halloran mailed me, actually mailed on paper in his shaking hand, 3 weeks after I left his son's agency. It said one line. You were the reason they walked through the door. I told you that in an elevator 9 years ago. I'm only sorry it took my boy losing you to prove your old man was right. I read it every morning. Not because I need to be reminded that I mattered, because I want to remember every single day that in this business they will tell you your name is nothing right up until the moment it walks out the door, and takes everything they thought was theirs along with it. Read the contract, sign your own name, and build the kind of relationships that no one else gets to vote on.